All right, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into a day that quite literally changed the world, and we're going to unpack the entire decade of data that followed. We're talking about a massive, deeply divisive, and utterly transformative event that fundamentally reshaped not just the UK, but the entire global political landscape. I'm talking, of course, about Brexit. We are going to cut right through the fiery rhetoric and use hard numbers to compare what was actually promised with what really happened.
Picture this, June 23, 2016. Going into that vote, the smart money, the established markets, virtually every economic expert out there, they all assumed the status quo would hold. But man, they were wrong. It wasn't just a British upset, it was a political earthquake, and its aftershocks were felt around the globe. It was this massive, flashing early warning light on the dashboard of globalization, telling us that profound historical change was already underway.
And you've got to see how tight this was. Out of more than 33 million ballots cast, deciding on a relationship that had shaped British laws and trade for nearly half a century, the decision came down to a razor-thin margin, 52% to 48%. That tiny gap represents a huge, deep-seated disconnect between the winners and the losers of the global economy. As the data shows, the winners just didn't understand how much the losers had actually lost, like those stable manufacturing jobs. And this vote, it was their chance to finally say, enough is enough.
So here's our roadmap for this explainer. First, the Brexit shockwave. Second, calculating the economic cost. Third, the political fallout. Fourth, the immigration paradox. And finally, the global aftershocks.
Kicking things off with Section 1, the Brexit shockwave, or the collision of promises and reality.
Talk about a reality check. There was this immediate, jarring disconnect right out of the gate. On the campaign trail, you had these soaring political promises. Prominent figures like Boris Johnson were telling packed rooms that the Thursday of the vote would be the country's Independence Day. But literally by Friday morning, the reality set in. The pound absolutely tanked on the global markets. Every single industry group started trading in the red. The economic shockwave hit long before a single policy was even drafted.
Moving on to Section 2, calculating the economic cost, disentangling the data. Okay, so how do you even measure the economic hit of something like this when the entire world was dealing with a massive pandemic and an energy crisis at the exact same time? Well, economists built a model comparing the UK to 23 similar countries to see how Britain might have done if it had just stayed in the EU. And initially, the model spit out a terrifying number, a 10% hit to the economy. For a £3 trillion economy, that is £300 billion. Absolutely massive. But is that actually fair? Well, when you pop the hood and actually peel back the layers of that data, a different picture emerges. Economists realize that 10% figure was heavily skewed by Ireland and the US. You see, Ireland's GDP is uniquely inflated by multinational companies. Pull them out, and the hit drops to 6%. Then look at the US. They totally missed the 2022 European energy shock. Plus, they were riding massive fiscal stimulus and an AI tech boom. So, to get the true fair cost, you have to exclude them too. Once we make those objective adjustments, we land right here, between 2 and 4%. This is widely considered a highly realistic estimate for the hit to UK GDP specifically caused by Brexit. Now sure, that's way smaller than the apocalyptic 10% people initially feared. But let's be real, a 2 to 4% permanent drop in GDP is still a highly significant economic blow. Now, let's compare those economic models to actual corporate data. There was this fascinating study by Stanford University and the Bank of England, analyzing internal data from thousands of British companies. That ground-level data points to a 6% hit over the decade. Interestingly enough, they found that about half of that economic damage came simply from the sheer surprise and uncertainty of the vote itself. The other half kicked in when trade barriers actually went up in 2021. Meanwhile, your broader macroeconomic studies average the hit out at about 8%. So no matter how you slice it, finding a positive overall number for the economy is incredibly difficult. But maintaining our neutral lens here, it really wouldn't be accurate to say the outcome was entirely negative. Financial services have remained surprisingly resilient, way better than physical goods exports actually. London is still a massive magnet for venture capital funding and a huge center for euro derivative trading. Plus, the UK's AI sector is actually seeing some unique benefits being outside the EU, simply because American tech giants are pretty wary of those strict European Union tech regulations. So there definitely are isolated areas of genuine economic resilience. All right, Section 3, the political fallout, or as I like to call it, a merry-go-round of leadership. Honestly, the economic impact almost feels like a sideshow compared to the staggering institutional instability Brexit unleashed in Westminster. Just walk through this timeline with me. David Cameron called the vote, didn't try to deliver it, and promptly resigned. Theresa May tried to deliver it, resigned. Boris Johnson pushed it through, resigned. Liz Truss had a tenure famously shorter than the shelf life of a lettuce, resigned. And finally, Rishi Sunak was defeated at the polls. 5 prime ministers since the vote. The sheer velocity of turnover is dizzying. The issue entirely redivided British politics, severely wounded the Conservative Party, and created this deeply fragmented, multi-party landscape marked by endless infighting.
Which brings us to Section 4, the immigration paradox, the widest gap between promise and reality.
Okay, we have to talk about this single biggest disconnect of the entire decade. A massive driver of the Brexit vote was the specific promise to control and reduce immigration, which was hitting record levels right before the vote. Voters genuinely expected a reduction, hoping it would boost employment and wages in left-behind areas. But the reality? We saw a massive overall increase in arrivals. While EU migration did go down, non-EU migration absolutely skyrocketed. Why? Because the government became completely desperate to fill huge labor gaps left behind after the COVID pandemic.
And you can imagine the psychological effect of this paradox. It was profound. You had these huge promises made by leaders who didn't stick around to deliver them. Then, in recent years, small boat arrivals became this defining, highly visible symbol of the Brexit era. It convinced so many voters that the country hadn't actually taken back control at all. This fueled deep resentment and left a large portion of the electorate feeling totally cheated. It just unleashed a wave of frustration against a political elite that promised strict control but delivered record high numbers instead.
And that brings us to our final section. Section 5, the global aftershocks, a fragmented world.
So you might be wondering, why does a domestic British vote matter to the rest of the world? Because Brexit was domestic politics with massive foreign policy consequences. It was the spark that helped set off a global populist revolution. It signaled this massive shift from an ever closer world of globalization into one defined by competing nationalisms. Today, the world is fracturing into these big, isolated trading blocs: the US, the EU, Asia, leaving Britain kind of isolated on its own. It essentially sent the post-war idea of unshakable Western unity right into reverse, proving that Europe and America could very easily start pulling in completely different directions.
So what should you actually take away from all this data? I think it boils down to this really powerful quote: "There is more to life than economics." This is the ultimate chastening lesson for policymakers everywhere. You can look at a spreadsheet and think, hey, the broader economy is strong, people are fine. But if your system ignores the losers of globalization, if you leave a significant chunk of your population behind, they are going to use the ballot box to punish you and the political system itself. And as Britain learned the hard way, you don't necessarily get a do-over.
Let's anchor ourselves in the present reality for a second. Today, the data shows that 52% of the UK public actually supports rejoining the European Union. But the political reality is super complex. Current leaders like Keir Starmer and previously Rishi Sunak have been seeking pragmatic, closer ties in areas that really matter, like defense, security, and trade. But easy solutions just aren't practical. Britain still fundamentally dislikes being told what to do, and honestly, Europe isn't especially keen to invite them right back in. Experts are now suggesting the UK might eventually land on some form of associate membership, giving them market access but requiring them to follow rules they might still object to. Which brings us to a final, incredibly provocative thought. Is Brexit the ultimate test case of a democracy? Think about it. The electorate willingly voted to do something that experts explicitly warned would be an act of economic self-harm, fully aware of the risks. Yet despite the chaos, the economic hits, and the absolute Maryville round of prime ministers, the core democratic system did not break. Democracy was tested to its absolute limits, and the establishment actually accepted the will of the people. It leaves us pondering the incredible resilience and the fragile nature of modern democracy in the age of populism. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I really encourage you to keep questioning the data behind the headlines.